Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Cathryn Philippe, and I'm the Director of Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Partnerships for the Massachusetts Historical Society. I'm happy to welcome you to our first event of the fall of 2021. We had originally imagined hosting this program live with a small group gathered to hear a dramatic reading of the play A Revolutionary Encounter in the historical setting of MHS. Unfortunately, the rise of the Delta variant has made it seem safer to host this event virtually. I want to thank our actors, our writer, and the staff of MHS, particularly Chris Coveney and George Major, for helping us put together a video of this play so that we can share it with you this evening. Although we miss being able to socialize with people in person, we hope that you enjoy this play from the comfort of your own home. If anyone is joining us for the first time, MHS is the first historical society in America, and we have been collecting, preserving, publishing, and sharing our nation's history since 1791. We hold an amazing collection of manuscripts that is measured in the millions, with the papers of US presidents, soldiers, mothers, scientists, and pioneers. We publish these collections, we make them available to researchers, and we host an active schedule of programs for the general public, educators, and academic audiences that explore the themes from our collection. We make our collection and our online programs available for free, but we're only able to do this thanks to the support of our members. If you're not a supporter of MHS, I hope you'll consider joining to support our work. Getting to the program this evening, I first want to mention that this program will be a little bit more than an hour. We traditionally try to keep our programs very close to an hour. This will be a little bit longer than that. Our recording of the play is about an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll have a brief Q&A following the play. Joining us for the Q&A will be Debbie Wiess, the author and director of the play. She is a Boston-based writer who writes in French and English and has created a wide variety of projects for the stage and screen, as well as poetry in 2 languages. She has a particular interest in historically based subjects related to the arts and literature and unusual encounters. She is joined by Cathryn Philippe, who portrays Phillis Wheatley. In December 2019, she had the pleasure of portraying Miss Wheatley for the first time during the annual Boston Tea Party reenactment at the Old South Meeting House, and continues to take the task of portraying her at the Boston Tea Party ships and museums. She studied acting at Plymouth State University and received her master's degree in secondary education from there as well. We will also be joined by the other actor in the play, Steve Auger, who portrays Benjamin Franklin. He has been acting locally for over 30 years on Boston stages, as well as in various museum and education venues. He is an IRNE nominated actor and proud member of SAG-AFTRA. He also is very excited to be part of bringing this story to life. So without further ado, I am going to begin playing the film.
Adieu, New England's smiling meads. Adieu, the flowery plain. I leave thine opening charms, O spring, and tempt the roaring main. For thee, Britannia, I resign New England's smiling fields, to view again her charms divine. What joy the prospect yields! From my poem, A Farewell to America. I wrote it almost 2 months ago, on the eve of my sail here to London, May 8th, 1773. In it, I expressed the many emotions evoked by the journey I was to make. Oh, I was filled with so much trepidation. I was leaving Boston, the home I have known for most of my life, to make a long, arduous trip across the ocean with many hazards. I had to push away the horrific memories that still haunt me of my first sea voyage many years ago. But I was elated and excited too to be offered this opportunity. How could I ever imagine that I, Phillis Wheatley, a young enslaved woman from Africa living in the American colonies, would find myself here, sought out and feted, treated like royalty, much like the King of England himself. And soon, to be a published author, this poem, just one of the 38 to be included in my book. My book. I like the sound of that. Quite a turn of events since I first arrived at the shores of the New World 12 years ago. A thin, sickly child at the tender age of 8. God's merciful hand was upon me, and I was fortunate to be purchased by Susanna Wheatley and her family, who would become my family, nurturing and encouraging me. That poem is dedicated to my mistress, Susanna, she who has been much like a mother to me, making this trip and all else possible. I strive to do her proud. I have met many of note, and should be accustomed. I'm surprised myself at how nervous I am to meet the gentleman who is to call upon me today, though he may be the most esteemed citizen of the colonies. Of everyone, I am most concerned about the impression I will make on him. He arrives now.
Miss Wheatley, may I say what a pleasure it is to meet you.
Oh, you do me great honor, Mr. Franklin, with your visit.
Oh, one hears near and far of Miss Phillis Wheatley.
Certainly not as much as one hears of Mr. Benjamin Franklin, scientist, inventor, journalist, writer, government official, statesman.
Please, I am just Ben Franklin, printer.
You are too modest, sir.
Your modesty may exceed mine. You have captivated the populace and are the toast of London.
You are very kind, but you can hardly say...
No, I will not let you deny it.
Please, have a seat.
I had left my card for Mr. Nathaniel Wheatley, but apparently he does not condescend to descend to greet me. I hope it is not indicative of his disapproval of our meeting.
You must not imagine anything being amiss. Young Master Wheatley, as with all his family, has been nothing but kindness itself to me. With the retirement of his father, he is now responsible for the family's business. He is much engaged seeing to various aspects of their commercial interest, as well as a few personal matters. In any case, here in England, I am my own mistress, keeping my own schedule, seeing whom I choose, and acting on my own behalf as I see fit. My apologies, Mr. Franklin.
For what? Oh, the tea. I can only imagine how the news of the new Tea Act will be received when it arrives in the colonies. This, I fear, will be even less tolerable than the previous acts.
Oh, I hope you will not misconstrue the choice of beverage to be a political statement on my part. The English, I have come to learn, are completely wedded to their tea.
Fear not, it will not be. Many here are like Dr. Samuel Johnson, amusing the evening, solacing the midnight, and welcoming the morning with their tea. Out of duty, I quickly became a devotee of coffee.
Coffee, which makes the politician wise and see through all things with his half-shut eyes.
Indeed, from Pope's The Rape of the Lock. Perhaps all involved in politics should be required to drink it.
Oh, I cannot tell you how vexing this is.
I have a confession to make, though. As much as I have become accustomed to drinking coffee, I do nevertheless enjoy a nice cup of tea now and then. I admit this only to you, Miss Wheatley.
Your secret is safe with me. May I pour you some tea, Mr. Franklin?
Oh, yes, thanks.
Now do help yourself, Mr. Franklin. Not to worry, they contain no meat.
I appreciate your kind attentions. Delicious.
And how long have you forsaken meat?
Oh, most of my life. When a young printer's apprentice, I happened upon Thomas Tyrone's book, The Way of Health, Wealth, and Happiness, which advocated avoiding food obtained from violence and oppression. I decided a vegetable diet was the more ethical and moral.
I am impressed by these concerns, which are most kind and humane.
Do not think me completely altruistic, Miss Wheatley. There are also practical aspects such as a diet saves time in the kitchen and is much easier on the purse, allowing me to buy and read more books.
I see. The most mercenary motives imaginable. A person who treats animals with such consideration must treat his fellows no less well.
I would never kick a dog nor whip a horse. However, I have been sorely tempted to do violence when greatly abused by Parliament. My visit was prompted by my niece's husband, Jonathan Williams. You must know them. They live in the same neighborhood and are friends of the Wheatleys. So, like all London, I have come to pay my respects and offer you my services, Miss Wheatley, from one Bostonian, if you will, to another. Despite the current strain between the colonies in England and a certain delicacy inherent in my position, I do not think myself immodest to say that I am not without some influence and stature here. If I can assist you at all during your stay, I sincerely hope that you will call upon me.
If I find myself in need of your services, I will not hesitate to do so. But I have been blessed with a fine circle of friends and supporters about me, so should have much ready assistance.
I see. I am just one of many paying court and offering aid to our celebrated Afric poetess.
Still, your offer is most appreciated, as is your considering me a fellow Bostonian. Although not born there like you, it is where I have lived most of my life and come to be my home.
I'm not sure where to call home myself. Boston, the city of my youth, where my relations still live. Philadelphia, where I established myself and my wife and children live, or London, the land of my forebears, where I have spent almost 20 years.
Our paths have been divergent, mine taking me to Boston and yours away from it, both as circuitous as Ulysses' Odyssey.
Happily, our paths have had the good fortune to cross here in London. You know Homer as well as Pope, I see.
Alexander Pope is the poet I most esteem. I have read his translations of both Homer epics, so I know the story of Ulysses well.
One can see you have a comprehensive education. That is evident in your poetry.
I have studied all the traditional subjects. I was a very precocious child, you see, and was fortunate the Wheatleys were so indulgent and encouraging, allowing me to satisfy my curiosity for learning. As soon as I knew English, I started to read scripture and the myths of ancient Greece.
Fine places to begin. I am not one to say, beware of bookish women. My feeling is women, in fact, all individuals, should be educated. It is a great waste of talent otherwise.
I am in complete agreement, Mr. Franklin, though many are certainly startled by my education.
You will appreciate that I am a member of the philanthropic group which, among other things, strives to promote learning among the Africans in the colonies.
Most worthy efforts.
You seem a voracious reader like me. What text do you prefer?
The Bible, which is the best of books, containing an endless treasure of wisdom and knowledge. Shakespeare, of course, and the poets Milton, Horace, Virgil, Ovid, Terence, in addition to Pope.
I could not agree more about King James' Bible. And regarding Shakespeare, 'tis true there's magic in the web of it. Despite my lack of talent and my father's disdain for poetry, I have always appreciated verse, having been exposed to it by my Uncle Benjamin. He passed to me his love of words and aspiration of able communication. I have read Milton and Pope, but also Dryden. Pope has said he owed much to Dryden for helping to create the first complete English translation of Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. Dryden, too, you should read. For me, Plutarch's Lives was a revelation. In it, one finds examples of justice, courage, and humility, as well as good governance. King George and his ministry should all be given a copy.
Several here have very generously given me funds with which to purchase volumes of the great works. I will now seek out those of Dryden as well.
You must also be sure to procure a copy of Dr. Johnson's English Dictionary. And what about philosophy? Its study helped me form my mind and thinking.
It does not hold much interest for me, for it can be at odds with Scripture. I find the writings of Hume and Kant very disagreeable and unfortunate. For men of learning, their conclusions regarding one of the burning questions of the day seem conceived as a means of justifying and perpetuating human bondage, and not founded on fact.
I know Hume, and his opinion on that point disappoints me. You alone are proof to contradict their views on the inferiority of the African. Earlier this year, my friend and fellow Philadelphian Dr. Benjamin Rush published his address against slavery in the colonies, citing only you as example and hailing your singular genius and accomplishment.
Mr. Rush flatters me with his praise. His wife, Julia Stockton Rush, is a very kind patron, and she must have acquainted him with my writings.
That sort of praise is not the exception, but the rule.
Perhaps. But to prove the case, I have had to allow myself to be paraded and put on display as an exotic curiosity before society for its pleasure and amusement. Reading my poetry or conversing on a variety of learned subjects in fashionable drawing rooms, to be petted and vetted, I have become a sensation. The black slave girl with the wondrous talent.
One can feel like the trained bear being trotted out to perform. I have felt the same regarding my experiments and inventions. I am constantly asked to demonstrate and explain them. Sometimes I think the only reason I'm invited to a party is to entertain the company with my glass harmonica or execute some scientific trick.
Have you not brought your harmonica to play for me then? No matter. Providence has deemed that you may now demonstrate your lightning experiments.
Had I only foreseen to bring the necessary equipment.
That is a pity.
The greater would be to let these pasties languish and get cold.
Provoke no more Jehovah's awful hand, to hurl its vengeance on thy guilty land. He grasps the thunder, he wings the storm. Servants their sovereign's orders to perform. The storm has been brewing for past several days. It now announces itself with the ferocity of the war of the Titans.
Another storm greater than this is brewing, I fear.
That, as with everything, is in the hands of God.
Perhaps, yes. It will still take the efforts of men and women to resolve the greater matters of society. Those lines you just recited are unfamiliar to me. Are they from one of your poems?
Yes, it's from Goliath of God.
Ah, the story of David and Goliath. We are much like David, preparing to face our own Goliath that is England.
What do we have to fear then? Look what happened to Goliath. Do not mistake what I said earlier, Mr. Franklin. I'm very proud to be acknowledged for my abilities and have my work praised. It is flattering, this recognition and admiration, but it is not without its degradations and embarrassments.
Celebrity can be a double-edged sword.
I am simply an example of what is possible, the potential within all of the African race. Nevertheless, there are still those who still doubt, though that is generally not the case here in England.
On that score, the English would seem the more enlightened. I take exception to Kant myself. In his essay of 1755, he had the temerity to refer to me as the Prometheus of our day.
Indeed, that was no compliment.
He thought me audacious for my study of the natural sciences. I am used as a cautionary tale and abused in the process. To my great relief, such beliefs are countered by the good opinions of innumerable scholars and the constant flow of visitors who make their way to my doorstep. It was me the king came to develop the lightning rod to prevent a calamity similar to Brescia's. What esteem and favor I add with the king. Goodwill is so easily squandered, little do we realize until it is too late.
And what is more constant than change? We must adapt as best as we can, accepting what we cannot change and leaving in the hands of the Almighty.
Using my own words as well as scripture to encourage and comfort me. I like that. You are very clever, Miss Wheatley. The depth and breadth of your knowledge is impressive.
The Reverend Miles has been very kind to take an interest in my education. He and others of the town graciously opened their extensive libraries to me. It was in one of them I saw the translation of Kant's essay, for instance. No one is more alive to the privileges I enjoy and good fortune than I.
What induced you to write, Miss Wheatley?
I learned much from observing. That is how I first came to understand English. Seeing others composing words made me esteem it a valuable art.
And your preference for verse?
I found it the best way to express myself.
Sensible to my failed attempts at verse, I have generally stuck with prose. We must look to what serves us best, but I have always enjoyed the poetry of others, and if I may, imagination. Who can sing thy force, or who describe the swiftness of thy course, soaring through air to find the bright abode, the ethereal palace of the thundering god? We on thy pinions can surpass the wind and leave the rolling universe behind. From star to star the mental optics rove, measure the skies and range the realms above. There is one view we grasp, the mighty whole, or with new worlds amaze the unabounded soul. Your admirers are legion, I among them. Your poetry appears in print here, and friends like the Rushes send along copies with the news of the day. The poem imagination strikes home with me. I much appreciate its allusions to the natural world.
You have paid me the highest compliment. To have one's scribblings read and appreciated.
Your poems are hardly scribblings. They are truly inspired.
Thank you. I do feel the divine hand upon me when I write. It must be hard to live far from your family and friends for so long a time. I had been abroad scarcely 2 months and missed Boston, the Wheatleys and my friends there terribly.
Duty brought me here. For the benefit of my family and fellow citizens, I make the sacrifice. And one does make new friends, as you yourselves know.
You know, I can see the Franklin family box from where I sit in Old South Meeting House.
You're a member of the congregation.
Since my admittance 2 years ago, though I must sit in the upper balcony, I like to think that up there I am closer to God.
I was baptized there the day I was born, when it was the Cedar Meeting House, well before its fine replacement that was built. That January of 1706 was so frigid that the minister had to chip away the ice to get at the water in the basin. Perhaps that was an omen about how I would take to religion, as it has left me a bit cold. You at least were able to decide for yourself. I hardly had any say about it.
Well, we don't always have as much say as we would like in what concerns us personally.
The irony is my father once thought I might have a clerical career and planned to send me to Harvard to study divinity. But my youthful impertinence and religious skepticism caused him, fortunately for me, to reconsider not wanting to waste his money.
You think very little of religion.
To my mind, religion serves little purpose and may cause harm. You know the lighthouse on the small crag of rock that marks the entrance to Boston Harbor?
Yes, Boston Light on Little Brewster Island.
When I was growing up, the keeper was a certain Mr. George Worthylake, an apropos name for the worthy man in such an occupation. He lived there with his wife and daughter, a servant and a slave. The family was very pious, and despite the distance and peril, traveled across the bay to Boston each Sabbath. Early November 1718, on the way home from attending church services after transferring from their sloop, their canoe capsized and all five were drowned along with a friend who was visiting them. The Boston newspaper had called it an awful, lamentable providence. I say it was a damnable providence.
Certainly a terrible tragedy, but it must have been God's will.
I do not understand a God who can will such things to happen, particularly those having just observed his Sabbath. I was 12 at the time and working in my brother James's print shop. He asked me to recount the story in a ballad that would be printed in his newspaper, the New England Courant. But as I have said, I did not have the talent for verse, and what I wrote was wretched stuff. You, Miss Wheatley, you would have done the family justice with one of your beautiful elegies.
Well, had I known of the family and its tragedy, I would have readily composed some verse. These are sad and pessimistic views you have on religion.
Perhaps I am too much the pragmatist. By the time I was a young man working as a printer in England, it may have seemed to some that I had become an atheist. Later, others thought I might be a Quaker because I lived among so many in Philadelphia. But not so. I am a thorough deist, believing in a supreme being who neither meddles nor intervenes with the universe.
Is that all you believe in, sir?
I believe in hard work, temperance, and self-control. My feeling is one should always try to do good. I am a free thinker, and I think that being one may be incompatible with religion. Religion has done much against science. One need look no further than Galileo for an example. He was persecuted by the papal hierarchy and his discoveries suppressed.
Well, is that the fault of religion or men?
I only suggest that it may be one's prerogative to determine one's views and practices concerning baptism and all else.
Ideally, there should be free will in everything. Still, it is man's imperfect nature that requires God's guidance. If Christ did not think it necessary, he would not have commanded his disciples to go and baptize all nations in the name of the Father. The day of my baptism and acceptance into the congregation was one of the most joyful and essential for the health of my body and eternal soul.
You are very pious, Miss Wheatley.
That surprises you.
Under the circumstances, yes.
'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, but there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. I am fully aware of the irony, Mr. Franklin. Life is laden with its trials for us to bear. It is up to each of us to make the most of what God or fate, if you prefer, has put in our path. In what way I believe we each find our destiny. One may have to endure great misfortune and hardship to be able to receive a greater bounty. There is much comfort in believing in the Lord and trusting to his goodness.
I admire the strength of your convictions and reasonings. I am glad to not have to face you in Parliament. And your crossing to England, I hope it was a pleasant one.
More pleasant than my prior one.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That was quite thoughtless of me.
No apology is necessary. The question was a perfectly natural one, and I fear my reply was quite impersonate. The journey was in fact very smooth and uneventful, which is what one hopes. The seas only occasionally so rough as to cause me to take to my bed. The fresh salt air was very beneficial. That had been the hope of my physician, who had advised a sea voyage to improve my health.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had been ailing. Advising a sea voyage was judicious. I have long been a proponent of the benefits of fresh air on one's health. But that was not the only reason for your trip, I dare say. The papers have been proclaiming your arrival in upcoming publication of your book by Mr. Archibald Bell.
Announced, perhaps, but hardly proclaimed. I have been much flattered and overwhelmed by the following of my movements in the newspapers. I do not wonder that the arrival upon English shores of one such as myself is out of the ordinary.
And is to have a book of poetry published.
My presence in London was thought to be advantageous to the promoting the sale of the book, and to alleviate any possible doubts that I am the actual author of the work. Oh, the most sensational expressions have been employed, and with such vehemence and frequency that I started to believe them myself. Born in the wilds of Africa, one of the greatest instances of pure, unassisted genius that the world ever produced.
Beware newspapers, I say, as they can be fickle, exulting, and excoriating in turn. To be one of their subjects requires a head that does not swell and the back of a duck.
This from a man who printed.
Who better to judge? Though it is mostly as their subject that I have obtained my education. But do let me congratulate you, Miss Wheatley. Publication is no easy feat.
In my case, it was more of a Herculean labor.
Publishers these days prefer printing the more lucrative propaganda pamphlets than volumes of poetry, I'll wager.
There was just one issue to surmount, to dispel any disbelief that the poetry was written by me, a young enslaved woman, preceding my poems in the manuscript. I have had to include a letter from my master John Wheatley, describing my circumstances, as well as an attestation signed by no less than 18 of the most respectable characters of Boston, including Governor Thomas Hutchinson and Lieutenant Governor Andrew Oliver.
Ah, our good governor and his lieutenant. Regarding them, I do not have much regard. And I am sure the feeling is mutual. They are not true friends of those they are charged to govern.
You have a rather low opinion of our two highest governmental leaders.
Good governance reflects the general sentiment of its citizens and acts to create laws for their benefit. Hutchinson and Oliver follow too completely the dictums of Parliament, hamstringing the People's Assembly and impinging on liberties in the process. Just look at the act to prevent the importation of Negro slaves that the Assembly proposed 2 years ago, rejected by Hutchinson. You must have found that distasteful.
It was hoped to be the first step in the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. But hierarchy and procedures must be respected. Is that not so? Governor Hutchinson's rejection was prior to the Somerset case. It would probably be favorably received now.
Of course, you are right. One is really patient for
virtue. However, I too admit to some impatience regarding certain things.
And despite all those steps, it was not possible to publish in Boston.
Only one publisher was willing to take on the project, but then the book, as proposed by Mr. Russell, was not wisely conceived nor priced, so there was a want of interest and insufficient subscriptions. My Mistress Susanna was undeterred. If my book could not be published in Boston, then we would look in another direction. Here in London, the Wheatleys have business dealings and many connections.
Well, English publishers are the more prestigious, so publication here should have its advantages.
The book's publication has been turned into an historic event, which Mr. Bell is capitalizing upon with no shortage of hyperbole.
One must make the most of hyperbole and all else one can.
Publishing in England has also necessitated a rethinking of the content. English sensibilities had to now be considered. I most particularly wanted to please the sensibilities of my patroness, Selina Hastings, Countess of Huntington.
One must always know which side one's bread is buttered. She is an important patron to have acquired.
Some of the poems would not be agreeable to British readers. They had to be rewritten or discarded and replaced by others. I could not possibly include a poem like On the Affray in King Street.
I dare say not.
We lived barely 2 streets from the government townhouse where the confrontation took place. We heard it all. It was impossible to do otherwise. The shouting, the terrible sound of muskets firing, the cries and screams afterward. It was terrifying. I have not been so frightened in a very long time. The bells of the churches tolled all night long. The whole city was in uproar and frenzy.
All colonials were outraged to hear of the bloody massacre in Boston. Such acts sorely test our union with England and make my task all the more difficult.
The dramatic and tragic have always incited my muse to create. The poem is a tribute to the bravery of the 5 souls who lost their lives in the cause of liberty. One was a man of African origins. Thousands came out to attend the funerals and see them laid to rest in the granary burial ground.
Innocent blood crieth unto God from the ground. It crieth for vengeance. The path to liberty tends to be a bloody one.
On the other hand, I have most assuredly included that my poem, To the King's Most Excellent Majesty, praising his wisdom in repealing the Stamp Act in 1768.
He had the intelligence, at least, to realize the folly of that.
Convinced by the conviction of your words, we of Massachusetts are indebted to you, Mr. Franklin, for your representation.
I hope I may perform my task with some sagesse and finesse. Still, it has been much like threading a needle wearing mittens. I had believed that my compromise, mutual understanding, and respect would be able to convince Parliament to grant its accord to the colony's rights, and with these rights, assured, contentedly remained nestled in the bosom of Mother England. For I do not believe obtaining the colony's rights must require severance from England. I love each one, and believe we are stronger together than apart. After the king's coronation, I cheered as loudly as any other. I thought he would be a virtuous and sincere ruler, and his reign a happy and glorious one. But the king and parliament governance of the colonies has not been without its blunders. Let us hope that they see reason and treat the colonies with a more just hand. Otherwise,
What do you foresee?
that we will go on injuring and provoking each other, till the only possible conclusion is reached: revolution. For the revolutionary fervor is charging the air. If Parliament and the King persist in their course, then they will most certainly lead us to war.
Surely you will be an instrument for restoring harmony.
No one would be happier than I, but I have used all the smooth words I can muster to little effect. To kick a little when superiors are much in the wrong may occasion greater consideration. Although the omens are inauspicious, I do still retain some hope that this latest contest between Massachusetts and the British government may be resolved. Strange to think that I, who ran away from Boston for its conservatism, 50 years hence have joined myself to it in support of its rebellious cause.
Why did you leave?
Well, that is quite a tale. The long and short of it is that after a childhood that passed very sweetly, my life began to have its oppressions when it came time to find an avocation. My father would not permit me to go to sea, and his candle and soap-making business was an anathema to me. A fitting trade for a bookish lad like me seemed to be printmaking, and as luck would have it, my brother James had just returned from England with the printing press. But I came to feel my apprenticeship much like indentured servitude. So tyrannical was he, and resentful of any rival pen. Looking back now, I think I may have been too saucy and provoking. At the time, my more liberal ideas regarding religion were irrevocably out of accord with those of my parents. There was nothing for it but to throw down the shackles and leave town.
Freedom is a most desired state, one cherished by all creatures. It is interesting, is it not, that citizens of the colony seek the liberty they deny other beings on their shores? That is something the English marvel at.
I have great sympathy for enslaved persons, as you see from my efforts to educate the Negro.
Yes, and it pleases me to know this. It seems incongruous how any Christian society can perpetuate such a cruel institution.
Yet there are a number of biblical precedents for slavery in both the Old and New Testaments.
The Bible neither advocates for nor justifies slavery. It simply records its historical existence. May I assume, sir, you do not keep slaves yourself?
Well, to be honest, Miss Wheatley, I do have one. But I do not consider him as such. Rather, he is a much valued servant and even a confidant. He is indispensable to me. I assure you that I have always been the most considerate and complacent in my treatment of them.
Then?
Another, King was his name, left me some time ago, shortly after we had arrived in England. But Peter has always stayed with me.
King is an interesting name for an enslaved person. Peter must have a similar regard for you as you have for him. It's been made clear to me by many friends here that one need not remain enslaved in this country.
Yes, since Lord Mansfield's decision just a year ago, here freedom is more firmly in one's own grasp and only a few steps away. Then, why, may I ask?
Why don't I take those few steps?
It must be tantalizing to imagine liberty so close at hand.
Oh, it is a most tantalizing prospect. As glorious as my time here in England has been, and as hard as it will be to leave, it can still be harder to imagine quitting one's home. Everything, even liberty, comes with a price. One must have great courage and the wherewithal to start afresh in a strange land.
So you have thought about it?
What, leaving? Like your king? Certainly is something to contemplate, to imagine, to dream of. But where would I go? How would I make my way here? There are many practicalities, many things to consider.
You have many friends and supporters here.
Perhaps, but the Wheatleys have been exceedingly good to me. They have become my family and done so much for me. They are why I find myself here with this prospect of liberty before me. Were I up to leave, I would be the most ungrateful wretch that ever lived. To never see them again, I do not believe I could bear that. And my mistress Susanna remains gravely ill. She needs me and awaits my return. I must go back.
Liberty often requires sacrifice. Each of us must determine which are worth making. Well, these are lovely surroundings in which to be lodging, Miss Wheatley. There is no sacrifice to be made here, I would think. Mr. John Thornton is one of the wealthiest businessmen in London. I know him only by reputation. You certainly have your friends in high places.
Well, I am grateful for the munificence of Mr. Thornton's kind invitation to stay with him and his family in their fine home. He is a very generous Christian and a good friend of the Wheatleys. When Reverend Oakham came to London a few years ago on a fundraising campaign, he stayed here, and Mr. Thornton contributed graciously to his Indian ministry.
I think I may surmise how you came by your patroness.
The Wheatleys and Thorntons are both friends of Countess Huntington, helping to finance her religious initiatives, and those of the good and kind Reverend Whitfield, who was her chaplain.
Ah, yes, the preacher of the Great Awakening. You knew him.
Oh, I had the pleasure of meeting both the Reverends Whitfield and Oakham on their tour of America in 1764, when they came to Boston and stayed with the Wheatleys. Despite my youth and position, Reverend Whitfield showed me great consideration and respect, and we conversed freely during his visits.
Filled with his
listeners
to a considerable distance.
He was truly the people's preacher, considering every person, no matter the color of their skin or social status, of equal worth and cut from the same cloth as the Creator. All were welcome at his sermons as brothers and sisters in
by more
Christ.
than 30,000.
I would go with Mistress Susanna
Hearing him
often to
speak
hear him speak.
leaves no one unmoved, no
Spellbinding
matter
orator,
one's
and his
belief.
words would galvanize all
For
assembled.
all the good
He gave the impression of addressing everyone individually,
realize he
even when
too
speaking to the most
owned
massive
slaves.
crowd.
He described
Quite
not
some years ago,
his
well before you
nor
were born,
demanded
I attended his
emancipation,
revival
but
meeting in
advocated for the
1739 in
and
Philadelphia.
exposure
I remember he had a loud and clear voice, articulating his words and sentences so perfectly he might be heard and understood at a great distance. As I have a scientific curiosity that is difficult to restrain, I performed an impromptu experiment to test the Reverend's prowess when he preached one evening from the top of the courthouse steps at Market and 2nd Streets. Both streets were filled with his listeners to a considerable distance. Retiring backwards down the street towards the river, I found his voice distinct till I came near Front Street. I computed that he might well be heard by more than 30,000. Hearing him speak leaves no one unmoved, no matter one's belief. For all the good he did and preached, you realize he too owned slaves. He described not the institution nor demanded emancipation, but advocated for the improvement of the conditions and exposure to Christianity. This he expressed in his 3 letters that I myself published in Philadelphia.
More tea, Mr. Franklin.
It seems it was expedient for Reverend Whitfield to turn a blind eye to the moral issues for economic necessity, making use of the labors of slaves in the southern colonies for the benefit of his orphanages and missionary efforts.
It is unfortunate that expediency is all too often necessary to the achievement of favorable ends. The measure of the Persians should be taken as a whole. The goodness and grace of Reverend Whitfield is undeniable. After Boston's Great Fire in 1760, he raised a considerable sum to help those who were suffering and was recognized for his generosity with a hero's welcome upon his next visit. We felt his loss keenly upon learning of his death soon after he had just been in Boston when he last toured. Never had I witnessed such an outpouring of grief.
You may imagine the reaction here in his native England.
I felt compelled to compose a fitting tribute to he who had meant so much to so many. In that atmosphere of general mourning, I was awash in inspiration. Hail, happy saint, on thine immortal throne, possessed of glory, life, and bliss unknown. We hear no more the music of thy tongue. Thy wonted auditories cease to throng. Thy sermons in unequaled accents flowed, and every bosom with devotion glowed. Thou didst in strains of eloquence refined inflame the heart and captivate the mind. Unhappy we the setting sun deplore, so glorious once, but it shines no more. If you find me shrewd, I have that and all else to thank my Mistress Susanna for. Whatever recognition and success I have reaped is attributed to what she has sown, her sage counsel and gentle guidance, her unwavering support and energetic commitment. It was upon her advice that I sent Countess Huntington a copy of my elegy to Reverend Whitfield, enclosed in a personal letter of condolence. Mistress Susanna also arranged for the printing and distribution of my poems and their publication in newspapers and the colonies and in London, creating my notoriety and acclaim.
I understand your gratitude to the Wheatleys and all you owe them.
In turn, the Countess became an important champion in my book. She has praised my poetry and graciously allowed me to dedicate the volume to her.
A valuable endorsement, to be sure, but for such a patron of those of the African race, it is strange she maintains the lands and slaves she inherited from Reverend Whitfield in America.
The lesson of expediency is one we all must learn. The Countess has an even shrewder sense for commerce and achievement of purpose. It was at her urging that an engraving of my image be put into the frontispiece as a further means of increasing interest in the book.
Will you see the Countess during your stay?
Oh, that had been my sincerest desire, but she has been very ill and had retired to her country estate in South Wales to recuperate. She has invited Master Nathaniel and me to see her there. However, for want of time before my return in a few weeks, with a heavy heart, I will have to send her our regrets. She has been very kind to me, and I so hope to thank her personally for her interest and support.
Well, Countess Huntington will be equally disappointed.
I had wanted to give her as a token the drawing and likeness which was used for my engraving. Oh. It will now have to stand in for the reality.
A very fine likeness. Who is the artist?
Scipio, a young man also of Africa, who serves the Reverend Moorhead in Boston. In tribute to his talent, I wrote a poem to him.
Will it also be included in your book?
That has been my only disappointment, not being able to see the Countess. But how I have been received in England with such kindness and so many marks of esteem and real friendship. I'm overcome by the attentions I have been paid since my arrival. I receive visitors here, am invited to gatherings at the homes of others, and am taken on outings to the sea and city. This has all taken some getting used to. My life back home is generally very tranquil, spent in quiet occupations. Excuse me a moment, Mr. Franklin. Yes. of bad news, Mr. Franklin.
Well, not bad news, but news indeed. All will hear soon enough. The Massachusetts Assembly is planning to pass a resolution requesting the King remove the governor and lieutenant governor from their offices for the preservation of amity and as a gesture of goodwill. It was to occur on the 25th of June, which was about a week ago. So it is now complete.
Do you need to leave to attend to the matter?
I will shortly. But a more urgent matter to attend to is that last pasty. London is the antithesis of the colonies. For one visiting from there, the city can be awe-inspiring and exhilarating, but also overwhelming and exhausting. You, Miss Wheatley, seem to have adapted well, nonetheless. I first came here when I was about your age, an audacious boy whose head was filled with dreams puffed up by false promises. I had a few friends to assist me, unlike you. There were innumerable challenges, but it was also an extraordinary time. I stayed for a year and a half before returning to Philadelphia, enjoying much of what the city had to offer. One should take advantage of opportunities that come one's way, but I need not tell you that. You have already had the chance to become acquainted with some of the local society.
Yes. This week, Lord Lincoln visited me here in my lodgings with the botanist, Dr. Solander, who had accompanied Captain James Cook on his expedition around the world. I met Lady Cavendish together with her sister, Lady Carteret Webb, had tea with Mrs. Mary Palmer, sister of artist Joshua Reynolds, who gave me signed copies of the 2 books she had offered. Yesterday, I visited Dr. Thomas Gibbons, rhetoric professor and English minister. He confided that his allergy to Reverend Whitfield was sparked by mine. I also met one of your fellow members to the Royal Society, Mr. Israel.
A nice sampling of London notables.
That I have found friends here among the nobility and gentry, their benevolent conduct towards me, the unexpected civility and complacence with which I've been treated by all, fills me with astonishment and gratitude.
And the king. You do not mention him.
I am to be presented to His Royal Highness King George III when an occasion compatible to our 2 schedules may be found.
Naturally.
Mr. Grenville Sharp, Esquire, has been a particular friend. He is a great ally of slaves, and it was his valiant labors which led to the Mansfield decision.
A decision heralded by England as it maintains its own heinous practice of impressing hundreds, if not thousands, of colonials into servitude on their vessels.
There is no shortage of hypocrisy or wrongs to right.
He has been an advocate for the cause of the American colonies. Perhaps we may enlist his assistance with this other scourge.
I do not think Mr. Sharp would shrink from any just cause.
One could do no better than to have him as one's particular friend.
He has been extremely solicitous and attentive, taking it upon himself to be my chaperone, escorting me about the city and showing me many of its sights.
He must appreciate having found such an amiable and charming companion. Have you gone outside the capital?
Not beyond Greenwich, where I visited the hospital and Royal Observatory. I'm too much occupied here in London.
That's a pity. I have made a point to travel in the British Isles each year in the summer, for the benefit of my education as well as my health. I was appalled by what I observed in Ireland on a recent trip. It is a fine country, and Dublin a magnificent city, but the appearance of general extreme poverty among the lower classes amazed me. They live in wretched hovels of mud and straw and are clothed in rags and subsist chiefly on potatoes. Our New England farmers of the poorest sort are princes by comparison. These and other observations of English tyranny have contributed to turning my sympathies.
The English have not a monopoly on tyranny or oppression.
Unfortunately, it is a pervasive condition found in most societies.
Even as one revels in the glories of the city, one sees the great inequities that exist.
That may explain the number of marvelous distractions to divert one's attention. There is no lack of amusement.
I have been dazzled to such an extent as I never imagined. Each day I'm more astonished than the last.
Have you been to the theater? Well, they provide ample spectacle.
I have been taken to see performances at several theaters in the city, as well as out to Sadler's Wells.
Sadler's Wells, that is truly an experience in itself. Its music house provides the stuff to dispel any dismal thoughts preying upon the mind. And if the propaganda is to be believed, its spring waters can dispel all that ails the body. Boston is an infant compared to Old England, whose history is a very long and intriguing one. Have you been taken to see its many points of interest? Its museums, for instance.
Oh, I have been to the British Museum and Cox's at Charing Crosses. Of the two, I preferred Cox's.
A veritable fantasy of automation. It is more spectacle than museum. That may be the most popular site in all of London.
Two others that greatly impressed me were the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey.
Great edifices containing the utmost in pageantry of British history and culture.
I have never seen anything as magnificent as Westminster Abbey. It is like a rich jewel box. And its size, it dwarfs all our churches here in Boston. The soaring stone vaults, Gothic arches, flying buttresses, all its art and stained glass windows, the many tombs of its royalty and greats. It was a glory to behold.
The intent, like from most things in London, is to inspire awe and demonstrate the power of the English realm. And it succeeds. You must have appreciated the Poets' Corner.
To see where the finest of the English poets and authors are buried and honored. Chaucer, Spenser, Milton, Shakespeare. It was all so humbling. Though I did not find Pope there, which disappointed me.
He, as a Catholic, could not be buried at Westminster, a Protestant church.
Here, religion can be as divisive as race.
Differences of any kind may be used as a wedge division. What did you think of the tower?
Oh, the tower is a grand fortress. But it is a curious place as it contains many wonders in addition to its horrors. It was chilling to be within its formidable walls. Its cruel history weighed upon my heart.
What most impressed you? The royal menagerie of exotic animals from the four corners of the globe, horse armory with knight's armor and weapons from prior times, or treasury with magnificent crown jewels, symbols of one of the most powerful thrones.
All made impressions upon me. But perhaps it was the royal menagerie that made the deepest. One hears the story of Noah's Ark, all of the extraordinary animals that are gathered two by two to be saved from the flood. But I never imagined that God had created such a fantastic diversity of creatures. I was most intrigued to see those which, like me, were from Africa.
There is a multitude of animals in the natural world. We have but scratched the surface in the process of discovering them. The Tower Menagerie is one of the oldest and largest collections of living specimens.
The animals were very strange to see, but also very beautiful. However, it made me sad to see those who were once roaming free in the wild now kept in cages. Worse, perhaps, is seeing the majestic lion, considered king of all the beasts, and a prisoner within the tower walls.
You forget their great scientific value. Much can be gained having them here so that we may study and appreciate them. The cages are for their safety as well as ours. They're well cared for, do not fear.
Even a gilded cage is still a cage.
Animals are lesser beings, put under the dominion of man by the Creator for our benefit. Isn't that what the Bible says?
Given your professions earlier regarding diet and religion, your justifications regarding these poor imprisoned creatures surprises me. I am sorry if I have vexed you, Mr. Franklin.
No, Miss Wheatley, your point is well taken. There is far too much hypocrisy in the world, and I would rather not add to it. One should be challenged, and you give me much to ponder.
I'm glad then. I have been fortunate to partake in many of the amusements of the city, when not otherwise employed in the preparation of my manuscript for publication.
In London, one is never bored. Your experiences here must provide much stimulation, perhaps some inspiration.
That cup runneth over. I have written several new poems here. One, about Niobe, was inspired by a painting of Ovid's Metamorphosis I saw while visiting Lord Dartmouth. It is my longest poem and the most recent addition to my manuscript.
So you had an interview with our dear Secretary of State to the Colonies, the Earl of Dartmouth?
Oh, I had a mere half-hour's conversation with Lord Dartmouth. He himself was the subject of another of my poems, written the prior fall at the prompting, or rather challenge, of Mr. Thomas Woodridge, an agent of his lordship visiting Boston. Mr. Woodridge was trying to confirm my abilities for the Earl, and I believe was convinced in the process.
That little surprises me. Lord Dartmouth is not my particular friend at the moment. We had such hopes for his support of the colonies. Instead, he has been a great disappointment.
My experience has been very different. The Earl commented warmly on my poems, and he made me a gift of 5 guineas, desiring I purchase a fine collection of Mr. Pope's volumes.
Well, you have not had to be on the opposite side of an issue with the man. Though perhaps you are simply the more politic and astute of the two of us.
I think you may have mistaken the true meaning of my poem, which is in fact about freedom and a plea for liberty for all. We had been hearing much about Lord Mansfield's ruling in Boston at the time. No more, America, mournful strain, of wrongs and grievance undressed complain. No longer shalt thou dread the iron chain, which wanton tyranny with lawless hand had made, and with it meant to enslave the land.
Hear, hear! May the message of freedom be heard loud and clear everywhere. The time has passed too agreeably. And much as I would like to stay, I fear I must bid you adieu, Miss Wheatley. Time and tide, as well as freedom, wait for no man. I should return to my apartment and set myself to the task. We will see what can be done to tamp down the flames of discontent, disagreement, and disunion, and promote the cause of liberty for the colonies. It was a true delight to meet you, Miss Wheatley.
And so, has your scientific curiosity been satisfied?
About what?
The Afric Boletus. I am sure you had your doubts, most do.
As with all of London, she has completely enchanted me. May I say also that the reality greatly surpasses the myth. This will surely be one of the most significant meetings of my life.
You flatter me, sir, in saying so. though I fear it may not even be a footnote in your life story, whereas it will be of great note in mine.
Oh, now it is you who flatters me. Among those 18 eminent men of Boston who signed your attestation, the many grandees of London, not to mention the king, it will be I who will be quite forgotten. I came to offer you my services, but they are hardly needed.
One can never have too many friends, and a true friend is the best possession. I have heard it said.
Good maxims to live by, to be sure. You have many friends, clearly, here and back home. I hope I may now be counted among them. Your poetry is elegant and affecting, Miss Wheatley. It makes me aspire to be a worthy subject.
You would be a marvelous subject. I will have to give that some thought.
I would be honored to be captured in your verse, although not necessarily in one of your poignant elegies. At least not for some time yet.
Oh, I promise the poem will not be an elegy. May the time for that not be for a very long while. Perhaps you will allow me to honor you another way, permitting me to dedicate my next volume of poetry to you.
Well, that would be a great honor. I heartily give you my consent, and if I may be of service to you here, Miss Wheatley, please do not hesitate to call me.
Thank you again most kindly, Mr. Franklin, for your visit and your offer. And of course, if there's anything I may do for you, sir.
There may be something you could do for me, Miss Wheatley.
Oh,
Your return to Boston is in the next several weeks, you said.
I sail by the end of the month.
Oh, but it is but a trifle, really.
Yes.
Well, if not too inconvenient, I wondered if you might take back a package for me, a gift, to be given to Jonathan Williams upon your arrival.
You distrust the mail.
Let us just say that my position as Postmaster General of the Colonies affords no guarantee of the sanctity of my correspondence will be respected. Your voyage provides a fortuitous occasion to convey several delicate items within which I fear may come to some mischief if sent by normal means.
I think you are correct to imagine that my passage should not attract the least scrutiny. Your package will be safe among the many others of books and gifts I will be transporting home.
I would be most grateful, Miss Wheatley.
I too believe one must make the most of opportunities that comes one's way. You, sir, have shown that you are not insensible of the plight of slaves, and I hope you will become an even greater friend to them. I will send word of the date of my departure.
I will not forget what has passed between us. Our conversation has made an indelible impression upon me and given me a good deal to reflect upon and consider. Peter will deliver the precious cargo to you just before you sail.
The storm is abating.
Yes, the rain is clearing. But what of that other great storm? Well, good day, Miss Wheatley. Thank you again. And I hope the remainder of your stay in London will be a very pleasant and fruitful one.
Thank you. A very good day to you, Mr. Franklin. May the Lord bless and guide you as you face the weighty tasks before you. I knew from the first my stay in London was not to be a long one. Once the packet ship is made ready, I will return home to Boston, alone. Master Nathaniel staying on to take care of family business, and prepare for his November nuptials with the daughter of a wealthy mercantile family. I marvel at these past weeks in London, and I will try to make the most of the time that remains. And perhaps I may still meet the king. But already I have achieved my purpose, my health is restored, and the publication of my book of poems assured. And this time, when I go across the sea to America, it will not be to my enslavement. A promise has been made. I am to be emancipated after my return. Yes, soon. With the grace of God, I will be free and on my own footing. Hail, happy day, when smiling like the morn, fair freedom rose New England to adorn.
Well, thank you all for staying with us. And I believe we now have time for a couple questions and answers. Debbie and Cathryn and Steve, if you'd like to come on, I think we have a few questions to take.
I'll just send out greetings to everyone who came out to see the play. Thank you so much. And I welcome questions.
Sure. So I want to be conscious of people's time because it is quite a bit later than our normal programs, but we do have a couple questions here. We have a question. How did you prepare for these roles? What are your favorite and most challenging things about playing such well-known people? So I guess that's for Cathryn and Steve.
I was deferring to you, Cathryn, since you have more current experience playing historical figures.
Okay, thank you. So I've actually been interpreting as Phillis Wheatley for coming close to 2 years now, give or take. The first time I portrayed her was in the Boston Tea Party reenactment. So the actual December 16th Boston Tea Party reenactment. And from that point on, I had actually moved on to working at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum and interpreting as her. So I spent a lot of time, and still now, going through the history of Phillis Wheatley and the Wheatleys themselves, and just Boston around the 18th century, especially during that time, right before the Revolutionary War. So that's a lot of what I've done in preparation to interpret and portray Phillis. But also looking at or trying to find other interpretations of her as well, or sort of trying to figure out sort of different opinions or thoughts on her work, because there are many different interpretations of what she speaks on and what exactly she's trying to say through her words. And depending on typically where that interpretation is coming from, sort of gives sort of different outputs of what exactly people think that she is trying to portray in her works. And I think that's very interesting, but also can be kind of difficult when you're trying to figure out how exactly to portray her thoughts on specific things that are happening, especially around her during this time frame.
Steve, did you have any thoughts to add?
In this particular instance, there wasn't a lot of time and things to do sort of a deep dive. Of course, Franklin is more, there's a lot on him, but I think for this particular, I was trying to get more of a grasp of the language and sort of what's kind of the subtext going on between them in this particular play. So I didn't do my normal, sort of research of a character. If this was going into like a production for a run or something, that would be my next step.
So we have a question from Rebecca who said, what was your script writing process? What archives and sources did you use, and how did you weave it together? So I guess that's for...
That would be a question for me. Thank you. That's a great one. Well, as my basis was looking at the biographies for both Phillis Wheatley and Franklin. Actually, the author of one of my sources, I think it's still in the audience. It's Vincent Coretta. I also read a biography by Richard Kegel, and then several about Franklin. And I read up about their times, about looked at their writings and their lives, and I tried to imagine like what this conversation would look like. And actually, this is in my mind a recreation of what in real time this conversation would be. What would they talk about? How would they react to each other? What stories would they share? And because this is a real life meeting that happened in summer of 1773. And I researched as to like when this could have happened, when she arrived in London, what she was doing when, and through their correspondence, because there's a few references. There's not a lot of information about this meeting. We just know that it happened. And I was able to kind of triangulate and figure out that it was late June or early July, before the 7th of July, when they met. And she arrived in London, I think the 17th of June. And so in looking at the writings, I tried to pull as much as possible their thoughts and their words, their phrasing. Let's see, and it was like a weaving. It was like weaving a tapestry, if you will, to create. And it was like these snippets that I would bring together and create these dialogues and really try to give them voice and make it as realistic. I mean, they're two intelligent people, and they would cover a lot of ground, I think.
So I think we probably just have time for maybe one more question. And this is also for Debbie. So we had a question that said that I understand that this is a shortened version of the play. What material has been left out? So we know that there was a slightly longer version. So what did we miss?
Right. So there is a 3-character version that's about 50, I think 20 minutes longer. And basically the third character was removed, and that shortened things tremendously. And then I just kind of tweaked throughout to do some trimming. To just focus on these 2 main characters.
I'm aware of the fact that it is close to many people's dinner time, so we should probably wrap up. So I want to thank you guys. It was a great play, and it was a lot of fun to work with you in terms of filming it. So thank you so much for your hard work, and thank you to all of our guests for joining us.